The November wind rattled the old windows of Margaret Hensley's house, slipping through the cracks like an uninvited memory. At 71, she'd learned to live with the creaks and sighs of the place. Every groan in the wood was a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Ever since Harold passed, 3 winters ago, even silence had learned her name. But having Clara here these past 3 weeks had changed something. Earlier that evening, they had baked oatmeal cookies together. Clara's laughter filling corners of the house that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Margaret had saved the last cookie beside Clara's bed, just in case she woke up hungry in the night. The little girl had been staying with her, while Margaret's daughter Denise searched for work and a new apartment. Margaret didn't mind stretching her small pension a bit thinner. The house felt warmer with a child's presence. Again, even if it meant skipping her own medication sometimes to buy the groceries they needed. But tonight felt different. The air carried a heaviness she couldn't quite name, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 2:07 a.m. when Margaret heard it, a soft whisper that pulled her from the edge of sleep. "Grandma." Margaret's eyes opened. In the doorway stood Clara, her pink pajamas ghostly in the dim light from the hallway nightlight. The little girl's hands were clasped together, and even from across the room, Margaret could see her trembling. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Clara's lower lip trembled. "I heard something." Margaret softened her voice, pushing herself up despite her protesting joints. "It's just an old house, honey. She creaks when she's sleepy, just like me." She patted the bed beside her with a gentle smile. Clara hurried across the room and climbed up, burrowing into Margaret's side. The child's small body was tense, her breathing quick. "What did you think you heard?" Margaret asked gently, stroking Clara's hair. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers gripping Margaret's nightgown. Then, footsteps in the hallway, but when I looked, nobody was there. Margaret held her closer, feeling the rapid flutter of the child's heartbeat against her ribs. Sometimes our ears play tricks on us at night. The heating pipes clank, the floors settle. "It wasn't the pipes, Grandma." Clara's voice was firm, more certain than a child should be at 2 in the morning. "Someone was walking." As Clara nestled against her, Margaret felt the small heartbeat against her ribs, a fragile rhythm that made her remember what it meant to be needed again. "Well, you're safe now," she whispered. "Why don't you sleep?" "Here with me tonight." Clara nodded against her grandmother's shoulder, and soon her breathing deepened into sleep. But Margaret lay awake, staring at the darkened doorway, listening to the house around them. And there, beneath the sigh of the wind and the moan of the rafters, came another sound, soft, deliberate and unmistakable. A single creak of the floorboard downstairs. Margaret's hand froze on the quilt. "Just the house," she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Morning light brought no comfort. Margaret stood in her kitchen, staring at the back door. She was certain, absolutely certain, she'd locked it before bed. She did it every night, the same ritual for 40 years. Turn the deadbolt twice, check the handle, whisper a small prayer Harold had taught her. But now the door stood slightly ajar, cold November air seeping through the gap. "Maybe I forgot," she murmured to herself, pulling it shut with a firm click. "Getting old, Margaret, that's all." Clara shuffled into the kitchen in her fuzzy slippers, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Grandma." "Morning, sweetheart." Margaret forced brightness into her voice, pouring milk over a bowl of cereal. "Sleep better after you came to my room?" Clara nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the basement door at the far end of the kitchen. "Grandma? Do you ever go down there?" Margaret followed her gaze. The basement. She'd barely touched it in years. Just old boxes, Harold's. Tools, things she couldn't bear to sort through. "Not much anymore. Why?" "I thought I heard something down there yesterday, like someone moving things around." Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down the milk carton. Old houses make sounds, remember, especially basements. The furnace. Kicks on, pipes rattle. I know, Grandma. Clara's voice was patient, almost sad. That's what grown-ups always say. The words hung between them like a small accusation. That afternoon, Margaret walked to the corner store, and Mrs. Chen from next door caught her on the sidewalk. How's that? A granddaughter of yours? Mrs. Chen asked, her shopping bags rustling in the wind. She's doing well, adjusting. Margaret hesitated, though she's been having some nightmares, hearing things at night. Mrs. Chen waved a dismissive hand. Oh, children and their imaginations. My grandson sees monsters in every shadow. She probably just misses her mother. Margaret nodded, but the words felt hollow. That evening she noticed something else. 3 eggs missing from the carton she'd just bought. She'd counted them at the store. There should have been 8 left. Now there were 5. If you're finding this story as unsettling as Margaret is, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. She checked the trash. Nothing. Checked the fridge again. Still 5 eggs. Clara, honey, she called toward the living room where the girl was coloring. Did you have eggs for a snack? No. Grandma, I had the cookie you left me. Margaret stood very still in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming beside her. The logical part of her mind offered explanations. She'd miscounted, she was tired, her memory wasn't what it used to be. But another part, the part that had heard that floorboard, creak in the deepest hours of the night, whispered something different. That night, she lay in bed with all her senses alert. Clara slept soundly in the next room now, a nightlight glowing beneath her door. Margaret had left her own door open just a crack, listening. At 2:13 a.m. she heard it again. Not a creak this time. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor below. Then the unmistakable sound of the refrigerator opening, the gentle suction of the seal breaking, the quiet click as it closed again. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her. To stay in bed, to pull the covers over her head like she had as a child. But Clara was down the hall. If someone was truly in the house. She reached for the phone on her nightstand, her fingers finding the cold plastic in the darkness, and then the footsteps started moving toward the stairs. What is Margaret about to discover? The truth is closer than she thinks, and more heartbreaking than she could imagine. Margaret didn't call the police that night. Instead, she sat frozen in her bed, phone clutched in her trembling hands, listening as the footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs. For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then the footsteps retreated, fading back toward the kitchen. She didn't sleep. She sat vigil until dawn painted the windows gray, her mind spinning with questions she was afraid to answer. When morning finally came, she found the back gate swinging open in the cold wind. I closed that yesterday, she whispered to herself, wrapping her cardigan tighter. The latch wasn't broken, it had simply been unhooked from the inside. Someone had gone out through her yard, or come in. Margaret's hands shook as she secured the latch, adding a twist of old wire to hold it shut. Her neighbor, Mr. Patterson, was taking out his trash and noticed her struggling. Everything all right, Margaret? She wanted to tell him. Wanted to say that something was wrong, that she felt watched in her own home, that food kept disappearing and doors kept opening, but the words stuck in her throat. Fine, just the wind keeps blowing this open. He nodded, already losing interest. That old gate's been trouble for years. Harold was always meaning to fix it proper. The mention of her husband's name hit like a small wound. If Harold were here, he'd know what to do. He'd check the basement, secure the house, make her feel safe again. But Harold was 3 years in the ground, and Margaret was alone with a mystery she couldn't solve and a granddaughter she needed to protect. That afternoon, while Clara was absorbed in her coloring, books, Margaret did something she'd been avoiding for months. She opened the basement door. The wooden steps creaked under her weight as she descended, one careful foot at a time. The air below was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old concrete. She pulled the string for the single bulb, and weak, yellow light spilled across the cluttered space. Harold's workbench sat against the far wall, tools still hanging where he'd left them. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old photo albums, things she'd meant to sort through but never had the strength to face. Everything looked normal, untouched. But then she noticed it. A blanket she didn't recognize, draped over an old chair in the corner, dark green, military style, definitely not one of theirs. Something's not right in Margaret's house, and the truth is hiding in plain sight. Subscribe to see what she discovers. You won't believe what happens. Next, Margaret moved closer, her heart pounding. Beside the chair sat an empty soup can, the label peeled off. And there, on the concrete floor, the faintest impression of someone having lain down. Someone had been here. Recently. She backed toward the stairs, her breath coming quick and shallow. Should she call the police now? But what would she tell them? That she found a blanket, that she thought someone might have been sleeping in her basement. They'd think she was a confused old woman. They'd probably call Denise, suggest Margaret wasn't safe living alone anymore. As she reached the top of the stairs, she nearly collided with Clara. "Grandma, why were you down there?" Margaret quickly shut the door, forcing a smile. "Just checking on the furnace, honey." But Clara's eyes were too knowing, too serious for an 8-year-old. "Did you find him?" Margaret's blood went cold. "Find who, sweetheart?" Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The man who comes at night. He talks to me sometimes. He says he's sorry. He says he's just so hungry." The world seemed to tilt beneath Margaret's feet. Clara has been seeing him all along. But who is he, and what does he want? Margaret sat Clara down on the living room couch, her hands trembling as she held the little girl's shoulders. She fought to keep her voice steady, to not let the fear show. "Clara, honey, I need you to tell me the truth. When did you first see this man?" Clara's eyes welled with tears. "You're not going to not believe me. Nobody ever believes me." "I believe you, sweetheart. I promise I believe you." Margaret's throat tightened. How long had this child been carrying this fear alone? "Please, tell Grandma everything." Clara took a shaky breath. "The first week I came here, I woke up and saw him standing in the hallway, looking at the pictures on the wall. He was really thin, Grandma. His clothes were all dirty and torn." Margaret felt sick. A stranger had been in her house, near her granddaughter, for weeks. Did he ever try to hurt you or touch you?" "No." Clara shook her head quickly. "He just looked sad. Really, really sad. Sometimes he'd see me watching and he'd put his finger to his lips like this." She demonstrated. "Like he was asking me not to tell. And then he'd go back downstairs." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "Because Mum always says I have too much imagination. She gets mad when I see things, and I thought maybe I was just being a baby again." Margaret pulled the child close, her own eyes burning. How many times had Clara tried to tell someone, only to be dismissed? How many nights had she lain awake, afraid and alone? "You're not a baby. You're very brave." Margaret kissed the top of her head. "And I'm going to keep you safe, I promise." But even as she said it, Margaret didn't know how. She should call the police. Of course she should. A stranger living in her basement, emerging at night while they slept. It was terrifying, yet something about Clara's description troubled her. The man hadn't threatened her, hadn't tried to harm her. He'd just looked sad, hungry. That night, Margaret did something that surprised even herself. She made 2 sandwiches, thick peanut butter and jelly, Clara's favorite. She placed one on a paper plate at the top of the basement stairs, along with a bottle of water. Then she sat at the kitchen table in the darkness. waiting. Margaret is about to make a choice that will change everything. If you're wondering what she'll do next, subscribe this story. This takes a turn no one expects. Hours passed. Clara slept soundly upstairs, a chair wedged under her doorknob for extra safety. Margaret's head nodded forward, exhaustion pulling at her, but she forced herself awake. At 2:47 a.m., she heard it, the basement door creaking open so slowly she almost missed it. Margaret's heart hammered, but she stayed perfectly still in the shadows. A hand appeared first, reaching for the plate. Then a face, gaunt, unshaven, etched with lines too deep for his years. He couldn't have been more than 50, but life had carved him hollow. Their eyes met across the dark. Kitchen. The man froze, the sandwich halfway to his mouth. For a long moment neither of them moved. Margaret saw fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt in her own chest. "Please," he whispered, his voice rough and broken. I don't want trouble. I'm just so hungry." Margaret found her voice, though it shook. "Who are you?" He lowered the sandwich, shame washing across his features. Earl Donovan. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be here. I had nowhere else to go." "How long have you been in my house?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. He looked down at his feet, at his worn boots held together with duct tape. "I was going to leave, I swear I was, but then the cold came and I'm sorry." Margaret should have screamed, should have grabbed the phone, but something in his voice, in the way he stood there defeated and ashamed, made her pause. "Are you a veteran?" His eyes snapped up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am, served 2 tours, but that was a long time ago." Margaret faces an impossible choice. Call the police or hear him out. What would you do? Margaret's hand hovered over the phone in her pocket. Every sensible instinct told her to call him for help. But something, maybe it was the way he stood there trembling or the pride fighting shame in his eyes, made her hesitate. "Sit down," she heard herself say, at the table, slowly. Earl moved like a man expecting to be struck, each step careful and apologetic. He sat at the far end of her kitchen table, keeping his hands visible, the sandwich still untouched on the plate before him. Margaret remained standing, keeping distance between them. "Tell me why I shouldn't call the police right now." "You should, ma'am." His voice was hoarse. "You absolutely should. I'm trespassing. I'm scared." "Your granddaughter. I got no right to be here." "Then why are you?" Earl's jaw worked, emotion flickering across his weathered face. "Because I ran out of places to go. The shelter's full every night. You gotta line up at 4 just to maybe get a bed. And when you don't, when it's cold like this..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I saw your basement window was loose. I thought, just for one night, just to get warm. I swear I was gonna leave. That was 3 weeks ago." "Yes, ma'am." Shame colored his words. "I know. I kept telling myself tomorrow I'd find somewhere else. But I ain't worked in 2 years. Can't keep a job when you got no address. Can't get an address when you got no job." He laughed bitterly. "Funny how that works." Margaret slowly pulled out a chair and sat, though still keeping the table's width between them. "You said you were a veteran." "Army. Infantry. Did my time, came home, tried to fit back in." His hands clenched on the table. "But some things don't fit back together once they're broken, you know." She did know. She'd watched Harold struggle with his own battles, invisible wounds that never quite healed. What happened? What? Lost my job when the factory closed, then my apartment, then my wife. Can't blame her for leaving. I couldn't keep it together. Earl's voice cracked. "Spent 6 months at the VA trying to get help, but there's a waiting list for everything. Meanwhile, winter keeps coming and the streets don't care if you served your country or not. This story isn't just about fear. It's about the invisible people all around us. Subscribe to see how one grandmother's courage changes everything. Margaret sat in silence, her mind racing. This man had frightened her granddaughter, had invaded her home, had taken her food. But looking at him now, really seeing him, she saw something else too. She saw Harold, who'd come back from his own war, different. She saw her daughter Denise, one paycheck away from this same desperation. She saw herself, stretching every dollar, skipping medications, wondering how long she could keep going. "I have a granddaughter upstairs," Margaret said firmly. "She's 8 years old and she's been terrified." "I know, I'm sorry." Earl's voice broke. "I tried not to scare her. I tried to stay quiet, stay hidden. But she kept seeing me, and I just asked her not to tell because I didn't know where else I'd go. You put that weight on a child." "Yes, Mom, I did, and that's maybe the worst thing I've done." Tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. "I was a good man once, I really was." Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. She thought of Clara carrying this secret, of Denise, struggling alone because she was too proud to ask for more help, of herself, pretending everything was fine when her pantry was half empty and her medicine cabinet emptier still. They were all surviving in silence, too ashamed to admit they were drowning. "Eat the sandwich," Margaret said quietly. Earl looked up, startled. "Go on, eat it before I change my mind about what I'm going to do next." His hands shook as he picked up the sandwich. He ate like a man who hadn't had a real meal in days, because he probably hadn't. Margaret stood and went to the refrigerator. She pulled out eggs, cheese, the last of her bread. Her pension check wasn't due for another week, but some things mattered more than budgets. "I'm going to make you something proper," she said, "and then we're going to figure out what happens next, together." Earl stared at her, tears streaming freely. "Now, why? Why would you help me?" Margaret's own eyes burned. "Because somebody should have helped you before it came to this, and because I'm tired of pretending we can all survive alone." Margaret's choice will ripple further than she knows. But can one act of kindness really change anything? Margaret barely slept. After Earl returned to the basement, with a proper pillow and 2 extra blankets this time, she lay awake, wrestling with what she'd done. Had she made a terrible mistake, invited danger deeper into her home, or had she simply done what any decent person should do? When dawn broke, she found Clara already awake, sitting on the stairs in her pajamas. "Is he still here?" the little girl whispered. Margaret sat beside her, wrapping an arm around thin shoulders. "Yes, honey, he is. But I need you to understand something. He's not a bad man. He's just lost. And very, very sad." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Like the stray cat we found last year. The one that was so scared it hid under the porch." The comparison caught Margaret off guard, but it was startlingly accurate. "Yes, a bit like that. Are you going to help him? Like we helped the cat?" Margaret's throat tightened. "I'm going to try, but it's more complicated with people." "Because grown-ups make everything complicated," Clara said matter-of-factly. Despite everything, Margaret smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, we certainly do." That morning, while Clara ate breakfast, Margaret made a phone call. She'd been avoiding. Her daughter answered on the 3rd ring. "Mum, is everything okay? It's barely 8. Denise, I need to ask you something." Margaret kept her voice low. "How would you feel if I told you I was helping someone? Someone who needs a place to stay for a little while?" Silence. "Then, Mom, please tell me you didn't fall for one of those scams. Did someone call saying they were from the IRS or—" "No, nothing like that." Margaret closed her eyes. "It's more complicated, but I need you to trust me. Mom, you can barely afford to take care of yourself and Clara. You can't—" "I know what I can and can't afford, Denise." The sharpness in Margaret's voice surprised them both. "I'm just letting you know, in case you hear something." After she hung up, Margaret found Earl sitting at the bottom of the basement stairs, looking smaller somehow in the morning light. "Ma'am, I've been thinking. What you did last night, that was kind, but your daughter's right. You can't afford to keep me here. Sometimes the hardest part of helping isn't the cost. It's admitting we can't do it alone. Stay with us to see how Margaret learns this lesson. What I can't afford," Margaret said carefully, "is to turn my back on someone who needs help. But you're right about one thing. I can't solve this by myself." She pulled out a worn notepad from the kitchen drawer, the kind she used for grocery lists and doctor's appointments. "Tell me about the VA waiting list, eh? And the shelters, everything you've tried." For the next hour, Earl talked while Margaret wrote. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking, a system so overwhelmed, so underfunded, that men who'd served their country fell through every crack. 3-month waits for counseling, shelters that turned people away at capacity, job programs that required addresses that required jobs, a maze with no exit. "What about family?" Margaret asked gently. Earl's face hardened. "Burned those bridges. I wasn't a good man when I came back. Said things, did things. They tried to help, but I kept pushing them away." He looked down at his hands. "By the time I wanted to fix it, they were done trying." Margaret understood that too. Pride and shame were powerful prisons. A knock at the front door made them both jump. Through the window, Margaret saw Mrs. Chen from next door, holding a casserole dish, her friendly weekly visit. "The basement," Margaret hissed. "Quickly!" Earl disappeared down the stairs just as Margaret opened the door, forcing a smile. "Margaret, I made too much lasagna again. Thought you and Clara might—" Mrs. Chen paused, her eyes narrowing. "Are you all right? You look exhausted. Just didn't sleep well, you know how it is." But Mrs. Chen was already peering past her into the kitchen. "Is that 3 plates on the table?" Margaret's heart stopped. She'd forgotten to clear Earl's dishes. "Oh, that's from last night. I was testing a recipe. Made a mess of it." The lie tasted bitter. Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, concern mixing with something else, suspicion. "Margaret, if something's wrong, you can tell me. If someone's bothering you, everything's fine, really. Thank you for the lasagna." She practically closed the door in her neighbor's face, then leaned against it, heart pounding. Earl emerged from the basement, guilt written across his face. "I'm making things worse for you." Margaret looked at the lasagna, at the 3 plates, at this man who'd served his country and been forgotten by it. Then she looked at the phone. "No," she said slowly, "but I think I know someone who might actually be able to help. Someone who used to work at the VA." She dialed a number she hadn't called in 2 years. Father Miguel from the church she'd stopped attending after Harold died. Sometimes asking for help was the bravest thing you could do. Margaret reaches out, but will anyone answer? And what will Mrs. Chen do with her suspicions? Father Miguel arrived that afternoon in his old sedan, the same gentle smile Margaret remembered from Harold's funeral. But his eyes were sharper now, assessing. "Margaret Hensley, it's been too long." He embraced her warmly at the door. "Your call surprised me. You said you needed help with a situation." Margaret glanced toward the basement door, then at Clara coloring quietly in the living room. "It's complicated, Father. Maybe we should talk outside." They sat on the porch steps. November wind biting through their jackets. Margaret told him everything, finding Earl, Clara's fear, the impossible choice she'd made. Father Miguel listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "You took a tremendous risk," he said finally. "I know. You could have been hurt. Your granddaughter could have been hurt. I know that too." Margaret's voice cracked. "But Father, if you'd seen him, really seen him. He fought for this country, and now he's living in my basement like he doesn't even exist." Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment. The VA has programs, but the waiting lists are months long. He told me. He's tried everything, Father. The system isn't just broken, it's abandoned people like him. So you decided to fix it yourself? Margaret laughed bitterly. I didn't decide anything, I just couldn't turn away. But now I don't know what to do next. I can barely feed myself and Clara. I certainly can't. You can't save him alone, Father Miguel finished gently. But maybe you don't have to. Hope flickered in Margaret's chest. Do you know someone who can help? I know several people. There's a veterans outreach coordinator I work with, and a woman who runs transitional housing. Let me make some calls. He squeezed her hand. What you did was dangerous, Margaret, but it was also brave. And maybe it's exactly what Earl needed, someone who saw him as a person, not a problem. One person's courage can start a ripple, but sometimes ripples turn into waves. Subscribe to see how this story transforms a community. As Father Miguel left, promising to return tomorrow with answers, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. It lasted exactly 47 minutes. That's when Mrs. Chen returned, this time with Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Liu from across the street, 3 concerned neighbors standing on her porch like a tribunal. Margaret, we need to talk, Mrs. Chen said, her voice serious. Mr. Patterson saw a man looking out your basement window this morning. A stranger. Margaret's stomach dropped. And Mrs. Liu heard noises last night, movement in your backyard at odd hours. Mrs. Chen's eyes were kind but firm. We're worried about you, about Clara. If someone's threatening you, no one's threatening me. Then who is he? Mr. Patterson demanded. We have a right to know if there's a vagrant in the neighborhood. Think about the children. Think about property values. The word vagrant hit Margaret like a slap. That's what Earl was to them. Not a veteran, not a human being, just a threat to be removed. He's someone who needs help, Margaret said quietly. Then call social services, the police, let professionals handle it. Mrs. Chen reached for Margaret's arm. You're too trusting, Margaret. You always have been. This man could be dangerous. He's not dangerous. He's just... How do you know? Mr. Patterson interrupted. You don't know anything about him. He could be wanted, could be on drugs, could be... He's a veteran! Margaret's voice rose, surprising them all. He served this country, and now he has nowhere to go because we've all decided it's easier to look away than to help. Silence fell on the porch. Her neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Margaret, Mrs. Chen said. Chen, softly. I understand you want to help. But you have Clara to think about. What would Denise say if she knew? I already told Denise. That was a slight exaggeration, but Margaret stood her ground. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I'm handling this. Father Miguel is helping me find proper resources. Earl will be gone soon, to a place where he can get real help. Earl? Mr. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. You're on a first-name basis with this person? Inside, through the window, Margaret saw Clara watching them. And in the reflection of the glass, she caught a glimpse of Earl's face in the basement window. Shame and resignation written across his features. He'd heard everything, every word. That evening, after her neighbors finally left, with promises to check in tomorrow, Margaret found Earl packing his few belongings into a garbage bag. I'm leaving, he said without looking at her. Tonight, I've caused you enough trouble. Earl, they're right, you know, about me. I'm dragging you down, making your life harder. His hands shook as he folded the blanket she'd given him. You got a granddaughter to protect, a reputation. I'm just garbage people want to throw away. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. Don't you dare say that. Earl finally looked up, and she saw tears in his eyes. Why not? It's what everyone thinks. Maybe it's what I am. No. Margaret's voice was Fierce. You're a man who's been failed by every system that should have caught you. You're someone who deserves dignity and help. And I'm not giving up on you just because my neighbors are scared of what they don't understand. Even if it costs you everything. Margaret thought of Harold, of Denise struggling alone, of Clara learning that love sometimes meant sacrifice, especially then. Margaret's stand has consequences neither she nor Earl saw coming. The final chapter reveals a truth that will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Don't miss the conclusion. Father. Miguel returned the next morning with someone Margaret didn't expect, a woman in her 50s wearing a Veterans Affairs badge and carrying a worn leather folder. Mrs. Hensley, I'm Karen Torres, Veterans Outreach Coordinator. Father Miguel told me about your situation. She glanced toward the basement door. Is Earl Donovan here? Earl emerged slowly, looking like a man preparing for judgment. Karen's expression softened immediately. Mr. Donovan, I've been looking for you. Earl's face went pale. Looking for me? Your name came up on our emergency housing list 3 months ago, but we had an outdated address. You'd already been evicted. Karen opened her folder. We have a bed waiting for you at the Transitional Veterans Home. It includes counseling, job training, and case management, if you're willing. Earl swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe. I applied so long ago. So I thought, I know, the system failed you. I'm sorry. Karen's voice was genuine. But we can start fixing that today, right now. Margaret watched Earl's face crumble, a lifetime of shame and survival finally breaking open. He covered his eyes with one shaking hand, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. Clara appeared from the living room and without hesitation walked over and took Earl's other hand. It's okay to cry, she said simply. Grandma says crying means you're brave enough to feel things. Earl looked down at this small child who'd been afraid of him just days ago, and something shifted in his expression. Hope, fragile and new. I'll go, he whispered. I'll try. 2 hours later, Earl stood at Margaret's front door with his garbage bag of belongings. Karen waited in her car outside. I don't know how to thank you, Earl said, his voice still rough with emotion. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Margaret squeezed his hand. We all do. That's what being human means. Earl nodded, then knelt down to Clara's level. I'm sorry I scared you, little one. Clara surprised them both by hugging him. You weren't scary. You were just sad. I'm glad you're going somewhere that makes you less sad. As Karen's car pulled away, Margaret saw Mrs. Chen watching from her window across the street. Their eyes met, and for a moment Margaret expected more judgment. Instead, Mrs. Chen raised her hand in a small wave, an acknowledgement, maybe even respect. This story isn't just about one grandmother's courage. It's about choosing compassion over comfort. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. That evening, as Margaret tucked Clara into bed, the little girl asked, Grandma, are we going to be okay? Margaret thought about her nearly empty pantry. The bills piled on her desk, the medicine she'd skipped this week. By any practical measure, they probably weren't. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be okay. Because we helped Earl? Because we remembered what matters. Margaret kissed her forehead. And because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. 3 weeks later, Margaret answered her door to find Father Miguel and Earl. She barely recognized him. He'd gained weight, his face had color, and he wore clean clothes that actually fit. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The hollow desperation was gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. Earl, Margaret breathed. I wanted you to see, he said, his voice stronger now. I start a job next week, kitchen work at a restaurant downtown. It's not much, but it's honest work, and I'm staying in the transitional home for 6 more months. while I save money. Earl, that's wonderful. Karen says I can apply for permanent housing after that. And He paused, emotion flickering across his face. I'm going to counselling, twice a week, talking about things I should have talked about years ago. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I'm so proud of you. You saved my life, Mrs. Hensley. You know that, right? Not just by giving me food and shelter, but by seeing me, by treating me like I mattered when I'd forgotten I did. Earl handed her an envelope. Inside was a card with shaky handwriting. Thank you for reminding me I'm still human. And tucked inside, 3 $20 bills. Earl, no. It's not charity. It's paying back what I took, with interest. His smile was shy but genuine. I know it doesn't cover everything, but it's a start. I always pay my debts. After they left, Margaret found Clara standing in the doorway, having heard everything. See, Grandma, we helped fix him, like the cat. Margaret laughed through her tears. I suppose we did, honey. We really did. That night, Margaret stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. She thought about how close she'd come to calling the police that first night. How easy it would have been to choose fear over faith, one choice, one act of courage, and 3 lives changed forever. Somewhere in the city, Earl was sleeping in a real bed, with real hope for tomorrow. In this house, Clara was learning that compassion matters more than comfort. And Margaret was discovering that sometimes the smallest hands can hold the biggest hearts, and that even in November's darkness, warmth could still be found. Not because the world was fair, but because someone chose to make it a little less cruel. Thank you for journeying with Margaret, Clara, and Earl. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of quiet courage and unexpected grace. Because everyone has a story, and everyone deserves to be seen.